First thing you need to do is get yourself a decent sized log. And before you do anything, sharpen your blade and just compare that horizontal blade to that skid. Before you open up the log, check the horizontal blade compared to the horizontal skid right here. So basically, you're checking the just how parallel that blade is currently sitting against your skid face here, right there versus there, and you just check that visually. So you want to make sure just by eye that there is in fact an actual tilt to that blade. If you need to make a quick adjustment before you get into that log, what you need to adjust is that little stopper bolt and that cone, right? So to give yourself more tilt, you need to bring that nut towards the beam and that cone towards the beam. As you can see, that determines where your swing stops. So to give yourself more tilt, push the bolt stopper here and the cone in further. Because you've just assembled it and it's a new machine, you don't know how well that blade's adjusted yet. So what you want to do is you want to get into that top face of the log. Make small little incremental cuts, like 2 inch, 2 inch, 2 inch, 2 inch, until you cut away the top slab. Don't worry that the blade isn't intersecting or the timber's not being able to come off, whatever. Just raise and lower and just whittle your way through until you reveal a flat surface on the top of your log. So that's step one. So we've just opened up the log face here, and again, yours might be a little bit messier. You might have lines drawn in the top face there, or your timber might not come off, so you'll have to raise it up and cut them all free until you get to a position where you've opened the face here. So now, I'll lower it 1/8 of an inch or half the width of the kerf. So I'll lower it down, and then I'll send it through in one clean skim, very light skim, very slow. And I'm watching to see if the front of the blade here and the back of the blade here is cutting equally. So that's what this whole crisscross thing is about. You want to see front score marks and you want to see back score marks. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it just needs to show here and there. So I'll lower it and I'll skim through very slowly. I'll watch the blade as it's going through, and then I'll show you the adjustment to make there. Right, so we've done our skim test, and I've confirmed that we're getting crisscross. It's got a slight lean forward here, so we get a little predominant forward marks here, but we're pretty close. So that's what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to achieve crisscross, a smooth surface. The last thing you want is this thing riding up and then dropping down at the end, and then plowing into the log as it comes back. So it should go out clean, come back clean. Right, so you've got two big bolts here. They look like 5/8. They're M16. So you need to crack them open with 2 ring spanners. So to crack them open, you'll have to swing between horizontal and vertical to get your ring spanner in here. So what I do is I use the open ring spanner at this side, and I use the closed ring spanner end on the inside. All right, so just crack them open, and then crack the fire one open there. Then you have these 2 adjusters here. They look like 3/8. they're M10. So basically, if you need the front of the blade to go down, you need to raise these nuts up, leaving a couple of mil gap there. Get a hammer, a rubber hammer, gently tap it down, and you can use your finger to tighten the bottom nut. So you're trying to lower that down. So the whole blade and the pulley will go down if you need the front of the blade down. Vice versa if you need to go up. Now this adjustment is very fine. So all you're talking about is a millimeter movement at a time. So you can just judge by the gap. Basically half the width of a washer each movement. A very fine adjustment. And then you lock these big nuts back up. So you go down and skim again, come back until you're relatively satisfied that that blade is running true, front and back. So what I can do right now is I can physically push the machine onto the slab and check that on the slab face. So it's best to actually push it on when the machine's switched off, then it won't score up your slab. But right here, so I can roll that tooth over to the front here. I can look at the gap, and at the moment, it's scraping at the front. So if we roll the tooth back here, we've got quite a gap here. It's about 2 mil. So at the moment, the blade is diving down. So what we want to do is raise that pulley and that adjuster up about a millimeter, because a mil there will bring that down a mil and this up a mil. So we're too low at the front, so I'll need to raise that up just a fraction at the front. So we'll crack this open. So I'll swing that up a bit there. So we use the open at this end and the ring at this end. All right, so loosen that one up, swing it back, and we'll loosen this one up. And use the ring spanner. Right, so both are loose now. Now we're going to want to go, we want to lower the front of the blade. Raise the front of the blade up, because the back had the gap, the front was scraping. And you can see on the slab the front score marks. So we take a 17 and a 16, and we're going to want to go, we're going to want to bring that up. So we've got to loosen up the bottom nuts. So we'll loosen that up. Like that, 1, 2, so about a millimeter. So just until that nut goes loose, right there, and then we'll get the one at the back, right there. Oh, out of the way. There you go, right there, and then we'll tighten the top nuts, like that. Okay, 1. 2. Right, so that's done. Now I'll lock up these big nuts again. Nice and tight. Swing it over and lock that one up. I think that's going to be pretty good. So we'll double check that blade on the log and see how we go. So we've just done a skim. It's very smooth, and we are getting crisscross front and back. So it's always important, especially with these bigger blades like the 12-inch, to always skim down and skim back again empty, so it has a good chance to skim the actual face. If you don't go down and return during your skimming, it's likely the blade's going to just, veer up a little bit and not give you a true adjustment. So I'll roll that blade back onto the log, and we'll double check that tooth. So I'm just rolling this tooth again to the front, and we are about 1.5 mils from the tooth to the slab, which is what you'd expect because this side is lower than the back side currently. So about 1.5 mils there, and then if we move that tooth over there, we're about 1.5 mils gap over there. So now you know that adjustment 1, crisscross, horizontal crisscross, is true. So that's done deal. Next, we'll take it out of the cut and we'll go down another 1/8 of an inch skim, and this time we're checking for the tilt. So you want this side of the blade lower than the back side. So we'll lower it down 1/8 of an inch, say 3 millimeters, and we'll skim 2 inch, and we'll go back again, move across another 2 inch, go down, go back again, and what we're checking for is a little tiny scribe line between those two cuts. I use the 2 inch as the gauge for what I require. Obviously, if you go a 2 inch and then do another 6 inch or a 12 inch, that line is going to be massive. But predominantly in horizontal cuts, you're doing smaller cuts. So I like to gauge it off 2 inches of movement. So if that transition line between the two is too heavy, you've got too much lean. If it's not visible, you haven't got enough lean. Now that's terrible. To have a negative lean like that, it means that the blade's going to grind up against his face every time you move across, heating up the blade, cutting wonky timber, all sorts of variables, so you've got to have a good tilt, or at least flat. But I like to have a little line between 2 inch skims. So we'll take it back, lower it down 1/8 of an inch, skim, go back, and we'll check the difference. Too low. Should be half the curve. So we send it down and bring it back, and then move over another 2 inch. And between those two cuts, you'll see that line. So go out of the cut, bring it back into the cut slowly. So you're making sure that you've skimmed it front and back. Right, now we'll go over 2 inches. So go here, 2 inches, send it down. Come back. Just skim that whole face of the log, and you can see these tiny little lines between transitions. So that's a well-adjusted blade right now. So we've got these tiny little lines all the way across. Now you'll have to, with a 12 inch, it's best to have a little bit stronger lead like that. But say with a 10 inch, 6 inch, and 8 inch, you can get a little bit less. Again, to adjust that, basically it's that little stopper bolt right here underneath the motor. Wind that in to give you more lead, wind it out to give you less lead. So that stops where that pivots. So more that way will give you more lead at the cutting side. Bringing it out will give you less. Obviously you have to adjust the cone to suit, so it's nicely tucked in there. Now you can take that nut out and you can put washers under there, or even take all the washers out, to get as much adjustment as you need. But if you find you run out there is another way to adjust that, and that's just by tilting this beam. The whole beam can be tilted to give you more adjustment at that region. It's an easy case of just swapping the top washers on the side of these rollers from one side to the other, and that'll actually rotate the whole beam. So, you know, you can get it as close as you can at the carriage, and if you need more, you can basically do that with all the top rollers, just by swapping those washers. If you need more adjustment, you can also do the bottom ones here. You've also got some adjustment here. You can put washers underneath these little sliders, which will actually tilt the whole frame. So there's quite a few ways you can adjust the sawmill to get more adjustment. This machine has a center leg, so before you do that roller adjustment, you'll need to loosen off these 4 bolts here so that it can relax the beam, and then you can put shims in there to accommodate whatever you need to rotate the beam at the particular angle. So now we're on to number 3, right? So I'm going to lower the saw, and I'm going to do a shallow cut, vertical cut, and then I'm going to go down deeper and deeper until I can get a full vertical side face of the log. And basically I'll skim it back and forth so it's nice and smooth, so I know it's perfectly flat. And then I'll turn the saw off and push it up against that side face so I can actually visually look to see how the teeth are comparative to the side face of the log. You don't want to go too deep because you might burn your blade. So you can't do deep cuts until you get that vertical blade tracking true. So you always start with shallow cuts, make sure that's right, and then go down and do your deep final depth cut. So it's not fully adjusted until you can do a maximum vertical cut. So we've done a 5-inch cut there, and I'm going to lower it down another 7 inches to give me a full 12-inch depth cut. I might take some boards on the side before I get to that full face, so then I can measure, you know, or just visually look how close the tooth is on this side versus the other side. So we've lowered down, we've done it in 2 sections just to take the strain away from that deep cut. Obviously you see a line here, I just went too far and I backed off, ignore that. But so what I'll do now is make sure that the surface is super flat. So I'll drive forward very slowly, skim it, drive back very slowly. In hardwoods you might have to do that a few times to make sure that that is 100% flat. And then we basically push the carriage so the blade is sitting right here. And then we check the tooth to the very top edge face here, and we check the tooth the other side. And you want to make sure that that is absolutely equal by eye. So what I'll do is I'll just skim it a few times, make sure that's flat, and then we'll check it out. Okay, so we've pushed the saw back onto the cut, and I'm going to rotate this tooth all the way up to the highest point on this side, and I can check, it shows about a 1mm gap there, and we roll the tooth this side, and about 0.5 mm gap there too. So it's not bad. You know, if I was a perfectionist, I'd bring it over that way a little bit, so it's bang on, but we're getting crisscross. It's cutting efficiently, so we're pretty well aligned. Okay, to make that adjustment, you need to crack open that big nut there. It looks like a 5/8, but it's an M16. And basically, using this pusher here, you can push it to the closer to the beam, which will affect the blade that way, or you could pull it that way. So you could use that little the little adjuster here to push and pull the axes there. So you want that gap to be the same at both ends. It's pretty close as is, but if I needed to change it, I'd loosen that and I'd jack it left or right. And what I do as a matter of habit is I put my finger here, and as I move it, I can feel micro movements with my finger. So we're only, again, talking 0.5 millimeter movements to get that right. So we're pretty good. I'm going to put some water on the machine because we're cutting so deep, but we'll make a 12-inch cut, our next go. And there's a couple of things that you should look for, and that is, if you've got your blade adjusted true, you should see a little square here where the two cuts intersect, and that little square should look the same from one end to the other. If the little square is wide here, it means the blade is tracking that way, right? So in effect, you're going to end up having a thick board at the operator end. The far end will always be true because that's the entry point, but the near end is where it exits. So if it goes zing or twang as it comes out, it means the blade's not cutting true. You want it to come out clean, and you want to drive it right back into the log without spraying sawdust. And what I look for, one, is your board the same width from one end to the other? If it is, great. Also, you can check that little square from one end to the other. If it's uniform, that's great. So that's the third adjustment. That's the vertical crisscross. Then we'll move on to the final adjustment, which is the intersect, which is the easiest, and we'll get to that shortly. But we'll just do a couple of cuts vertically to make sure that we're all good there, and then we'll move on to that final adjustment. Okay, so that cut the 12-inch pretty easy. I did lower it a little bit earlier when I did my double drop. That's what that's about. So I was a little bit beyond its 12-inch depth capacity. So I raised it back up to 12 inches. So yeah, that ate it really well. And as you can see, there's no like zing here. It comes out nice and clean. My little square is uniform from one end to the other. My timber looks good. So that's the third adjustment, your vertical crisscross. So again, you're looking for the crisscross here. So it's cutting, you know, equally on this side of the tooth as well as that side of the tooth there. So now the final adjustment. This is the easiest, the one that you leave for last, and probably the one that you get most concerned about. And that is when you cut a board and the board doesn't come off, and you have to rip it off with a wedge or a crowbar or whatever. It's such a simple adjustment. So you've either got that happening, or you got all these vertical lines in your top slab face. So the blade's cutting too deep. It's either cutting too high or it's cutting too deep. So, and really, on any of these swing blades, that's the easiest, most simple adjustment possible. Basically, where the two blade meets here, or you know, the single blade meets, you have a threshold of about 7 millimeters where they have to overlap. If it's not quite right, if it's too far down, it'll cut in grooves in the slab. If it's too high, the timber won't come off. So literally, that's just adjusting the bottom cone. So to affect that adjustment, it's basically this, right? So if it's too far down, it's drawing lines, the blade's like this, exaggerated. If it's not quite cutting through, the blade's sitting too high, right? So basically, you want to lower that blade. So put your tooth all the way down and push it over the log again where the cut is, and you should have a gap from the bottom of the tooth to the slab face of about 3 millimeters. That's one way to do it. The other way is just simply raise it up a little bit, you know, bring that up equally, couple of mil, which will mean it'll bring the two cuts together. So, you know, I usually just cut a board and go, oh yeah, it needs to go down 3 mil. There you go. That's where it goes. It needs to go up 3 mil. That's it. So really, the adjustment 4 is super easy, and that's the final piece to the puzzle. And you'll also note when you're doing shallow vertical cuts, you know, a little bit of spring tension in the cut won't pull down as much as a 12-inch, right? So in the 12-inch, it's pulling down a little bit. So I've only got like a couple of mil there, but you know what? I'm happy because it's not drawing lines. If it's drawing lines, then the blade's too far down. I need to bring it up a bit. So yeah, there's a couple of things to consider there. So you know, in shallow cuts, you should have about a 3x3 square from one end to the other. Obviously, that square gets cut away every time you do a board. So that's just an indication of how those two cuts meet. So there's one final element, and that is, earlier I mentioned you can adjust your rollers here to actuate tilt of your beam to get more adjustment for the lead. Well, you can also adjust one end independent to the other if you find that your lead in, the line transitions from one end to the other. Usually that could be a little bit rough, but if you were pedantic about it and you wanted that line to be perfect from one end to the other, especially when you're double cutting, you could independently twist the beam from one end to the other. So basically you can put a level on this side of the beam and compare it to the other side of the beam. And you can get it pretty close just by adjusting one end's rollers. So you're effectively twisting the beam from one end to the other. You can twist it, it will twist to get that adjustment.